Welcome to Crimeroom, a true crime podcast. I'm the speaker, and my name is X. It doesn't matter who I am, it only matters what they did. Join us. Enter the room.
Crimeroom is designed for mature audiences and is unsuitable for young or sensitive listeners. Discretion is strongly advised.
Colin Howell was born in Portadown, Northern Ireland, in 1959. He qualified as a dentist at Queen's University and met his wife-to-be Leslie in 1981, when she was studying to be a nurse in Belfast. Leslie was originally from Plymouth and had one brother, Chris Clark, an anaesthetist in Blackpool. Once Colin completed his qualification and set up a dental practice, he and Leslie married in 1983. Colin was a devout Christian and a committed churchgoer. The couple had 3 children together. Colin was popular and known to be very charming. His friends and church community described him as a good Christian man. The Howell family were highly respected among their peers. To an outsider, Colin and Leslie's relationship looked like a successful marriage. They had 3 children, and Howell's business appeared to be doing well. On the surface, Colin was a devoted father who was an active part of his children's lives. All in all, he had 10 children with 2 different wives. He attended every sports game and organised their birthday parties. He was a loving father who would do anything for his kids to ensure their happiness. In 1981, an 18-year-old farmer's daughter, Hazel Elkin, married a 22-year-old man named Trevor Buchanan, who worked as a constable for the RUC. The RUC stands for the Royal Ulster Constabulary and was the Northern Irish police force that was active from 1922 until 2001. The couple married at Omagh Baptist Church. The Buchanans had 2 children together, Lisa and David, soon after they got married. In 1986, Trevor and Hazel moved to Charnwood Park in Coleraine. Hazel and Trevor had a happy marriage. They loved each other and their children very much. Trevor had a steady job as a police officer and had no aspirations to climb higher in his career, and he was happy with things as they were. Hazel, on the other hand, had just started a new job as a Sunday school teacher at the local church and had bigger ambitions. Colin was everything Trevor wasn't. Charming and outgoing. Hazel was high maintenance and behaved as though she had married beneath herself. Because Trevor was a police officer by profession, Hazel assumed that he would eventually be promoted to superintendent, which would automatically uplift her own status within the community. By all accounts, Hazel was a strange and difficult person and known to be a bit standoffish. Trevor, on the other hand, was a quiet man who never went looking for trouble and often did as his wife told him to do. In early 1990, Colin and Leslie attended swimming lessons arranged by Coleraine Baptist Church. The couple met Trevor and Hazel while attending the playgroup. In 1990, Colin Howell and Hazel Elkin began an adulterous relationship. It was extremely passionate from day one, and instead of being careful, things got out of hand. They were careless in hiding their affair. The couple were confronted by the minister of Coleraine Baptist Church, Pastor John Hansford, about the relationship, and they agreed to attend counselling. Hazel often felt guilty about her relationship with Colin, but as a devout Christian, Colin would convince her that it was all right and that this had always been God's plan for them. It wouldn't have happened if God didn't want them to be together. Later on in the same year, Hazel became pregnant. She wasn't sure who the father of the baby was, so she decided to have an abortion. Colin agreed to travel with her to England for the procedure, as abortions are illegal in Northern Ireland. The clinic they visited in England was the same clinic Colin had taken his wife to 3 times before. After the abortion, they agreed to end their relationship, but after a few months had passed, they decided to pick it up again. Colin and Hazel repeatedly met in secret at Castle Rock Forest, where they thought nobody would find out. One day, they were spotted by another member of their church and their cover was blown. Having been discovered, Colin and Hazel confessed their partners and their pastor. Trevor Buchanan was left devastated, but wanted his marriage to work. For another 4 months, the two couples continued to receive counselling through the church, but even so, the affair carried on. Howell described his affair with Hazel as being like an addiction. Eventually, Hazel and Trevor decided that they would get a divorce. But by this time, Hazel and Colin had already concocted a plan. They met once to explain and talk over their plan, and a second time where Colin gave Hazel some strong sedatives. On the 18th of May 1991, Colin connected a hose to his car exhaust and ran the hose into the lounge where his wife, Leslie, was drugged and asleep on the sofa. He used a baby's feeding bottle to connect the hose. As he held a gas pipe to Leslie's face, she cried out the name of their eldest son Matthew in panic, and Colin muffled her cries by pulling a duvet over her face. Leslie then became unconscious as her life slipped away. Once Colin was certain his wife was dead, he called Hazel to let her know that he was on his way to see her. He put the body of his dead wife in the boot of his car and drove to Trevor Buchanan's house. Trevor Buchanan awoke to find Colin gassing him in the same way as he had assaulted and murdered his own wife. Trevor put up a struggle and tried to overpower Colin, but it was all in vain. Colin had pounced on him out of nowhere and had the upper hand. He gassed Trevor to death within moments. Trevor's body was dressed by Colin and put in the car boot along with Colin's own wife. Colin then drove the car containing both bodies to Leslie's deceased father's house in Castle Rock. Colin put Trevor's cold body into the driver's seat and placed his wife's body outside the boot. He then surrounded it by family photographs and a letter which his wife had written after a suicide attempt when she'd been at her most depressed earlier in her life. The next day, on Sunday the 19th of May, Colin pretended to be utterly devastated as he contacted the church leaders and told them that his wife had gone missing. Trevor and Leslie's bodies were discovered in a fume-filled car in a garage at Leslie's father's house later that same day. Leslie Howell was wearing a pair of headphones with an old cassette player in her hand which played her favourite piece of music, although she would never hear it ever again. Hazel and Colin continued to meet in secret after the funerals of their spouses and would do so for another 5 years to come. In 1992, a coroner's court ruled that both Trevor and Leslie had committed suicide in what seemed to be an apparent suicide pact. According to the medical evidence found at the scene, they both died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Colin and Hazel thought that the death of their spouses meant they could continue their romance in peace. In 1994, Colin took his children to visit Hazel. Together with all of their children, the couple decided to go on holiday to Newcastle, County Down, as well as the Lake District in England. Things seemed to be going pretty well for Colin and Hazel. So well, in fact, that by 1995, Colin asked Hazel for her hand in marriage. The couple visited a few different dentistry practices in Scotland as they were planning to resettle with their new blended family across the Irish Sea. But their relationship once again came to an abrupt end in 1996. A few weeks after the couple split, Hazel was seen around town with a new man and acted as though her affair with Colin Howell and the awful deeds they committed had never happened. For Colin, it took another year before he met the next love of his life. In 1997, he met Kylie Jorgensen at a Bible study class. She was already divorced with 2 children of her own and had fled an abusive marriage in America, her homeland, before moving across the ocean to Northern Ireland. Colin and Kylie got married in May of 1997 and together they had another 5 children. For another 10 whole years, Colin lived his life normally. Nobody seemed to suspect the horrible things he'd done, and he had a seemingly happy life with Kylie and their family. However, tragedy struck the Howell family when Colin's eldest son by his first wife, Leslie, died at the age of 22 in a tragic accident in Russia. Matthew Howell had lost his grip on a stairwell and fell down 4 floors from an apartment block onto the concrete surface below. He had been studying at St. Andrews University and was on placement in St. Petersburg as part of his undergraduate language course when he died. Colin was devastated and mourned the loss of his son. So in April 2009, 17 years later, Colin made the decision to finally confess to the police. He would admit he made up a story to give the impression that his wife and Trevor had committed suicide together because they couldn't bear the thought of knowing their spouses had been having an affair for such a long time. Colin Howell handed himself into a police station almost 20 years after the killings took place. The guilt had become too much for him to bear. He admitted to police that he gassed his former wife Leslie and Trevor Buchanan and had fooled police into believing they had taken their own lives. In February of 2009, Colin Howell and Hazel Stewart, formerly Hazel Elkin, were charged with the murders of their former partners, Trevor Buchanan, who was 32, and Leslie Howell, who was 31. They both denied the charges. Colin believed he would never be caught. His arrogance became clear in an interview at Coleraine Police Station on 30th of January 2009 once he began speaking to police. In March 2009, police even said they were re-examining the death of 27-year-old Alexandra Hickman Smith, whose family had originally been told she had died from diabetes, and that her death was not being treated as suspicious. She had been living at the same caravan site as Howell for a time in 2008. The investigating detectives also decided to re-examine the death of Leslie Howell's father, Henry Clark, who died 5 days before his daughter, apparently from a heart attack or a seizure. Even though the death of Henry Clark was unrelated and due to personal health problems, they wanted to rule out the possibility that Colin was responsible for that as well. Colin told the detectives that he knew he lived in a world of believing he could do anything, like a fantasy world, where he could do whatever he wanted and get away with it. In many ways, Colin Howell was a narcissist who was completely in love with himself. He lived in a world that wasn't familiar to the average person. He was a fantasist and had delusions of grandeur, which meant he believed there would be no consequences for his actions. As a devout Christian and a man of God, his actions were certainly contradictory to what is written in the Bible. These delusions of grandeur became even more apparent during the investigation in the case against Colin. It was revealed that he had made an investment of several £100,000 in a company in the Philippines that claimed it knew the location of millions of pounds worth of gold buried by the Japanese towards the end of the Second World War. Colin Howell travelled to the Philippines and was told that he'd lost everything. Only then did he realise that the whole venture had been a complete and total fraud. Just like with the death of his son, he saw the loss of his investment as a payback for what he had done years before when he murdered his wife and Trevor Buchanan. Colin began to believe that this was God's way of making him suffer for the sins he'd committed. Colin admitted to police that he was a control freak who expected to get his way on all occasions. And because he was a Christian man, he also expected the women in his life to do as he told them. He was questioned about the controlling, manipulative side of his character at Coleraine police station on the 30th of January 2009. He even admitted to convincing his deceased wife Leslie to have 3 abortions before they were married. As Colin confessed to his horrible crimes, his second wife Kylie filed for a divorce and brought all 7 children with her home to America in an attempt to remove themselves from Colin's reach. On the 5th of July 2010, Colin was charged with 17 counts of indecently assaulting 6 women at his dental practice over a 10-year period from 1998 to 2008. Colin himself had admitted to assaulting these women, and when approached by the police, the women recalled the events with details matching the information Colin had provided. On the 4th of October, he pleaded guilty to indecently assaulting 3 female patients at his surgery on dates between July and December 2008. He denied 14 other charges of indecent assault against the same 3 women and 3 others. On the 18th of November, just days before his trial was due to begin at Belfast Crown Court, Howell changed his plea and pleaded guilty to the murder of his first wife, Leslie, and his former lover's husband, Trevor Buchanan. On the 3rd of December 2010, Colin was sentenced to a minimum term of 21 years in prison. He was already on remand at Maghaberry Prison near Lisburn in Northern Ireland. When Hazel found out that Colin had handed himself into the police and confessed to the murders, she was completely shocked. For over 10 years, she had been able to live a normal life under the radar with the family and kids that she loved. To Hazel, life had carried on as normal. There was no way she could have foreseen that one day everything would change and that the truth would find her again, as it so often does. On the 8th of February 2011, the prosecution lawyer at Coleraine Crown Court decided the double murder plot was a joint plan. He then said that Hazel played an active role in that joint plan to kill for selfish ends, as he outlined the prosecution's case against Hazel. Hazel claimed that she only went along with Colin's plan because she was afraid of him, and that she also feared for the life of her children whom she loved so dearly. But the arguments against Hazel also claimed that she had 3 choices. She could have chosen to say no to Colin, she could have confessed to Trevor about the plan on the night of the murder, or she could have chosen to not let Colin enter her house. Because Hazel did none of these things, she was guilty in the eyes of the law. While she had expressed sorrow, sadness and regret during police interviews, these emotions had mostly surfaced when she addressed the effects the events had on herself, her children, and her present husband. She showed little to no remorse when discussing the damage caused by her actions, or remorse for those whose lives had been ended. The prosecution lawyer said that Hazel Stewart knowingly entered into this agreement and assisted Colin Howell in ensuring he could safely kill her husband, and afterwards they both covered up the act together. The prosecution continued to tell the jury about a series of interviews given by Mrs. Stewart when she was arrested in January 2009, when she changed her account of the events 3 times. On the 14th of February, Colin Howell began giving 4 days of evidence at the trial of his former lover, Hazel Stewart. He told the court that Hazel was not convinced that they could get away with making Trevor and Leslie's deaths look like suicide. According to Colin, Hazel's concern wasn't over committing the crime, but over being caught. She fully supported the idea to kill her husband and Colin's wife, but she was afraid of losing everything she had. During this court hearing, It was the first time some of the details of Colin's part in the murder emerged, as he had pleaded guilty ahead of his trial and there was not much need for further questioning. Hazel's defence lawyer claimed the money was the only reason Colin had murdered his wife. During the trial, it became clear the stories between Colin and Hazel were inconsistent, as Hazel didn't want to plead guilty and wished to clear her name. The barrister said that Colin gained a payout of £414,000 from his wife's will and testament. The barrister said that Colin gained a payout of £414,000 from his wife's will and testament, life insurance, and endowment payment, as well as cash from her late father's estate. This would be more than enough reason for wanting to kill her and keep his relationship with Hazel going without having to keep it a secret. Paul Ramsey, who was the lawyer defending Hazel's steward, blamed everything on Colin and said that all his financial problems would have been solved with the death of his wife. It was as simple as that. Even with these accusations, Colin denied the suggestions and claimed that he only received £212,000 payout after his wife's death. But that same day, he also admitted in court to flicking his wife with a live cable in attempts to electrocute her just a month before her death. This story was backed up by a friend of Leslie Howell's who testified in court. On the 17th of February 2011, the final day of presenting all evidence for the court, Colin denied the prosecution's claims that he was a monster and made it very clear that Hazel had gone along with his plan from the get-go. He told the court that there was no way the crime would have been possible without her help and that she'd never said no or objected to Colin's plan at all. Altogether, there were 15 taped interviews with Hazel Stewart where she spoke to the officers investigating the case in 2009 were shown in the courtroom. In these tapes, she said she wished she was dead when the officers questioned her about the murders. During the trials, Hazel's children Lisa and Andrew were amongst the audience wiping their tears with handkerchiefs as they listened to the horrible crimes their mother had been accused of committing. In a further interview with the police, Hazel told them that Colin would often provide her with laughing gas before having sex on his office dentist chair. She recalled that one time, Colin gave her an overdose which made Hazel lose control and jump out of the practice window. It scared her because Hazel claimed she knew that Colin was trying to render her defenceless, and it caused her to panic. Hazel told the police that the biggest mistake of her entire life was meeting Colin Howell, and that she had paid the price for it. She then said to the court, "I would like to say sorry to Trevor's family. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a son. I have a son and I love him so very much." Hazel Stewart then admitted that she'd convinced her husband to take a sleeping pill on the night the murder took place because she didn't want him to feel any pain. After a 7-year relationship with another man, in 2005, Hazel married her second husband, David Stewart, a former police chief superintendent. On the 2nd of March 2011, the jury also found Hazel Stewart guilty of murdering Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan. Colin had already pleaded guilty in November 2010 and was sentenced to 21 years imprisonment. Since his imprisonment, Howell has been a model prisoner, always being polite, courteous, and relatively content up until recently. As of late, he's been known to struggle with his past, perhaps as the seriousness of everything he has done is sinking in. Colin Howell thought highly of himself as he treated upper tiers of society in his workplace, even seeing royalty at his dental practice, including Queen Rania of Jordan. He charged thousands of pounds for his treatments and expected people to pay because of his high status in society. In Colin Howell's eyes, God had everything laid out for him, and it was all there for him to take without any consequences for his actions. These are common traits among narcissists and sociopaths. To other people, those lacking empathy, can seem charming and extroverted to onlookers. They are seen as people who are comfortable in the presence of others and have the ability to make other people feel comfortable around them. Colin Howell used his influence within the community to assault women in the dentist chair while they were under anaesthetic and sedatives, rendering them defenceless against him. He showed no remorse and carried on with his daily life as normal, without giving his actions a second thought. Only one of Colin's children has maintained a relationship with the killer dentist. Lauren Bradford was the only family member to visit him in custody after he confessed to killing her mother, Leslie, and policeman Trevor. Recently, an ITV television show called The Secret portrayed a dramatised version of the murder. It gained a lot of attention and opened up many questions. Even though Colin had been doing well in prison up until that point, all the stress of the TV show put so much pressure on him that he collapsed and was sent to hospital. The Secret was a popular drama on ITV, and while many of the events portrayed Colin and Hazel's respective family members accurately, they said that there were also a lot of factual inaccuracies and many events that didn't really happen or that had been over-exaggerated for the sake of dramatic effect. Despite his gruesome crimes, Howell has admitted to having just one regret about confessing. That is trusting his second wife, Kylie Jorgensen, who he confided in about the slayings, to stand by him. He believed the mother of 5 of his children would support him when he finally held his hands up to the callous killings 18 years later. But when Howell walked into a police station and revealed the murders, Kylie fled. However, the small coastal community of Coleraine was shook to its core by the double murder. Nobody could have guessed that 2 highly respectable members of the community, who seemingly had everything, would commit such an unforgivable crime. Colin used the word of God as a way to justify his actions, and while Hazel Stewart was equally as guilty, he also manipulated her to go along with it, even though she struggled with Christian guilt around their affair. The Trevor Buchanan and Leslie Howell murder was called the Black Widow murders by local media, referring to a female insect who sucks the life out of her male counterpart. There have been many Black Widow murders throughout history, but in this case, perhaps Hazel Stewart wasn't the brains behind the operation. Hazel claims she went along with what Colin told her to do because of his charming and convincing nature. Perhaps she even loved him and wanted to start a new family with him. Or maybe she just wanted life to be a bit more exciting than it was with Trevor, and got much more than she bargained for. Thank you for listening to episode 10 of Crime Room. I'm the speaker, and my name is X.
If you enjoy listening to Crime Room, please give the show a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Crime Room is available now on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe for updates when new episodes are released. Sign up to the Crime Room newsletter or submit episode suggestions at crimeroompodcast.com. That's crimeroompodcast.com. Find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Crime Room is narrated by X. Additional voicing by Matthew O'Reilly Kavanagh. This episode was written by Jasmine Isaacson. Produced by Rachel McDermott. Mixed and scored by Andrew Lynn. The Crime Room theme song is by Sarah Sherlock.